We've all been there, sitting down to watch a horror movie with rock bottom expectations, only to be pleasantly surprised at how good or even great things turned out. On paper, some films bring eye rolls and minimal excitement, but it soon becomes clear their loose premise is actually pretty darn inspired. So with that in mind, I'm Andrew from What Culture Horror, and here are 10 horror movies with terrible concepts but amazing execution. Number 10, Christine. I adore John Carpenter, my absolute favourite director of all time. Even Elvis. But even then, it's tough to keep a straight face through the logline of Carpenter's Christine, which revolves around a car that grows jealously possessive of its new owner, Arnie. Carpenter proves to be an outstanding match for Stephen King's source novel. Much of Christine's success lies in how eerily it personifies the titular vehicle and explores its peculiar relationship with Arnie, allowing Carpenter to push the goofier aspects of the premise, that is basically all of it, to the periphery. From Carpenter's assured filmmaking through to Keith Gordon's sharp performance as Arnie and the evocative sound design, this is nothing if not a film that wrings every last drop of intrigue and unexpected character development out of its seemingly dopey concept. Whether the recently announced remake can similarly avoid devolving into excess silliness, that remains to be seen. Number 9, Ouija, Origin of Evil. You know who asked for a prequel to 2014's wildly loathed horror flick Ouija? Nobody, because why the hell would you? But Ouija Origin of Evil had one major ace up its sleeve, hiring the great Mike Flanagan to co-write and direct. Flanagan is one of the most skilled horror filmmakers working today, and while Origin of Evil is far from his finest work, it does nevertheless demonstrate his enormous versatility to take a dud of a concept and hammer it into a surprisingly involving genre offering. Flanagan quite smartly creates enough distance from the 2014 film that this basically feels like a prequel in name only. Couple that with his typically finessed work behind the camera, keen focus on character development over cheap jump scares, and the superb performances he gets out of Elizabeth Reese and Lulu Wilson, and there's a strong argument to be made that this is the most improved horror follow-up of all time. Number 8, Butt Boy. Nobody could blame you for seeing a movie called Butt Boy on your streaming service of choice and just scrolling right past it. But as horror comedies about people shoving things up their ass go, this one's actually shockingly good. Indeed, Butt Boy's anally obsessed premise of a man who eventually starts devouring people via his rectal passage, it sounds less like the plot of a real film than a Mad Lib, but fair play to writer-director-star Tyler Cornack, who finds a way to spin it into something legitimately engrossing, at once deeply surreal and taking its concept far more seriously than anyone would have ever reasonably expected. Butt Boy is quite a baffling achievement, and without question one of the most uniquely twisted horror films you will ever see. If nothing else, Cornack and his team committed to the bit 110% and dared to make it more than a mere one-note joke. Number 7, Rubber. Horror movie concepts don't get much dumber than Rubber, which revolves around a sentient tire that goes on a rampage using its psychokinetic powers to explode people's heads. Yes, it's easy to close your eyes and imagine Rubber as a slice of no-budget schlock produced by people who had few resources beyond a couple of spare tires lying around at home, but courtesy of surrealist filmmaker Quentin Dupieux, Rubber is a top-level rendition of a laughable concept. Touting a peculiar yet transfixing meta-frame narrative, Rubber is more or less a satire of contemporary moviegoing, and especially our desperate desire for all film narratives to make sense. It is a film that verbally confesses its commitment to no reason whatsoever up front, and absolutely follows through for the remainder. Beyond that, the tire murder sequences are genuinely unsettling and well executed in their own right, even if the film is a fundamentally absurd piece of work. In different hands, Rubber would probably be a one-dimensional joke that grows old fast, but Dupieux's deeply left-field sensibilities keep this one feeling fresh and beguiling all the way to the end. Number 6, Geralds Game. Geralds Game touts one of those ridiculous setups that's tough to sell to fellow film lovers because it just sounds so damn stupid. Seemingly a pattern with Stephen King adaptations. This follows a woman, Jessie, who finds herself handcuffed to a bed when her husband, Gerald, suddenly drops dead in the middle of a sex game. Given that Gerald drops dead mere pages into King's novel, and the rest of the story takes place inside Jessie's head, it was long deemed that Gerald's Game was unfilmable by both Hollywood and by Stephen King fans. But along came genre maestro Mike Flanagan again to prove otherwise, ingeniously reworking King's text into a brilliantly cerebral and at times squirm-inducingly visceral psychological horror classic. Much of the credit undeniably goes to Carla Gugino, who commands the screen for all of its 103 minutes, mining the abject terror of a situation that, in writing, might sound more comedic than actually scary, you know? Number 5. Susperia, 1977. Dario Argento's Susperia revolves around an elite dance school that's actually a front for a coven of witches, a concept that's innately tough to take seriously. But Argento is smart, of course, and he makes Susperia less a film about the particulars of its narrative, but more its intoxicating vibes. The neon-soaked lighting, larger-than-life production, elaborate kills, and that unforgettable goblin score conspire to ensure that Susperia goes far and above and beyond the apparent constraints of its premise. Such is the joy of giallo as a subgenre. Would a whole coven shtick play straight as part of a more conventional horror flick? It almost certainly wouldn't have worked, but Argento's heightened approach to the subject matter basically negates how asinine it all sounds when spoken aloud. Tellingly, one of the chief complaints about Luca Guadagnino's 2018 remake is that it takes itself too seriously and flattens many of the outrageous, intentionally garish stylistic choices of the original, in turn exposing the corniness of its setup for all of us to see. Number 4. Creep, 2014. Everyone was basically over found footage as a subgenre by 2014, and Creep didn't exactly make a major case for itself on paper, centering around a videographer Aaron, who is hired by a strange client Joseph, who's a terminally ill man who wishes to record a video diary for his unborn child. It's just not attention grabbing in the slightest, and combined with a passé found footage format, doesn't make itself much appealing. And yet, Creep is far more than the sum of its parts. Sure, the style isn't doing anything new, but Patrick Bryce and Mark Duplass dig deep into the toe-curling awkwardness of the central situation, which amid Joseph's increasingly bizarre behaviour, grows ever more sinister. Hey, and we like sinister here at What Culture Horror. Duplass's performance as Joseph teeters on a razor's edge that's sure to leave audiences unsure quite what to make of him, but absolutely unsettled by his various quirks, shall we say. The result is one of the most materially odd horrors of the last decade, and one that's a huge credit to his oft-dismissed subgenre. Number 3. Black Christmas, 1974. Black Christmas may be one of cinema's first major seasonal slasher flicks, coming in an entire 4 years before Halloween, but a Christmas set horror in which a house full of sorority girls are picked off by a serial killer doesn't exactly sound like something with real staying power. It sounds like exploitation trash, honestly, and so what a surprise it was that filmmaker Bob Clark actually made this potential campfest into a genuinely taut, well-crafted, and downright patient slice of suspenseful horror. The kills are memorably nasty, the ominous atmosphere is suffocatingly thick, it has actual ideas on its mind, and remains compellingly dark all the way to Black Christmas's grim final scene. This isn't disposable nonsense like its title and premise might suggest to the uninitiated. It's a predecessor to Halloween, which deserves to be celebrated with considerably greater enthusiasm than it currently gets. Number 2. Smile. The marketing for Smile did a frankly horrible job of selling it as anything other than another brain-dead, high-concept horror flick in the vein of Blumhouse's Truth or Dare. And admittedly, the concept sure is daft. A trauma demon spreads a curse by killing its intended victim, while forcing them to wear a massive smile, in turn passing the curse onto whoever witnesses the death. It's incredibly easy to picture a deeply terrible rendition of this movie. Yet credit to debut and filmmaker Parker Finn, who basically delivered a best-case scenario for this type of story. From the tight visuals to the unsettling atmosphere and surprisingly nuanced approach to its central theme of trauma, Smile has far more on its mind than merely serving up gory thrills, though it does have some nice gory thrills. Abetted by a strong lead performance from Sosie Bacon, yes, daughter of Kevin, this remains one of the most pleasantly surprising, can't believe it wasn't schlock horror flicks of the last few years. And now we get to look forward to Smile 2 as well, which is on the way. Number 1. Titan. And finally, Julia Ducournau's Palme d'Or winning Titan follows Alexia, a serial killer who has an erotic fixation with cars due to a car crash that gravely injured her in childhood. To be blunt, it's the movie where a woman shags and is ultimately impregnated by a car, and that's how it will always be remembered. But Ducournau refuses to live down to the most gutter-brained expectations of that premise, and instead crafts a staggeringly provocative psychosexual horror film you will not forget in any sort of hurry. In her acting debut, Agathe Roussel gives a phenomenal performance as Alexia, and while Alexia's journey is considerably more emotional and character-driven than the hand-wringing over its wild premise would suggest. As with other examples on this video, it isn't difficult to imagine a much worse version of this movie, one which is propelled forward by nothing more than empty shock value. But Ducournau instead delivers the most strangely tender and thoughtful film about a woman boning a motor vehicle you'll probably ever see.